One of the antagonists that you're about to meet arred two young women after murdering them. Our tour of HMP Full Sutton, HMP Frankland and HMP Durham, though, begins with the most shocking murder case so far in 2026. In August 2018, a notoriously violent prisoner by the name of John Onyemaechi staged a riot at HMP Full Sutton that lasted 8 hours and required the force of 100 riot officers to overcome. If I were John McGowan-Fazakerley, though, I'd be a lot less worried about any rioting going on at HMP Full Sutton, which is where McGowan-Fazakerley is strongly rumoured to be being held, and a lot more worried about a particular matter that I'll come to in the next moments. On the 1st of April 2023, McGowan-Fazakerley and his lover, Jamie Varley, were entrusted with the care of a 9-month-old baby boy by the name of Preston Davey. On the 27th of July 2023, so roughly 4 months later, baby Preston was rushed to hospital in a state of cardiac arrest and, despite the valiant efforts of hospital staff, couldn't be revived. In the 4 months that Varley and McGowan-Fazakerley had the baby in their care, the baby was subjected to the most horrendous acts of essay and violence and psychological torment that you can imagine. The baby's main caregiver was Varley because he had taken a year off his job at South Shore Academy in Blackpool to look after the baby, while McGowan-Fazakerley, who was on £100,000 a year plus bonuses in his job as a financial sales manager, continued to work. In his role at South Shore Academy, Varley was not only a teacher of textiles but also head of Year 11 and, wait for this dramatic twist, head of safeguarding. The safeguarding role in a school used to be known as the child protection role. I think you've gathered that Varley was the main perpetrator of the violence and A bleep USC, including SA, that baby Preston suffered. And Varley also made lots of videos and took lots of pictures of the things that he did to Preston. McGowan-Fazakerley knew all about what Varley was doing to baby Preston because Varley showed him the pictures and the videos, and frankly, even without any pictures or videos, this baby was forever covered in bruises from head to toe, so McGowan-Fazakerley would have known anyway. The video showing Varley holding baby Preston on his lap while the baby is sleeping and then shouting boo at the baby and instantly waking the baby up, of course, giving the baby a start, a shock, has long since become infamous.
Boo!
Lots of people other than McGowan-Fazakerley knew what Varley was doing to the baby, or at least had strong suspicions that Varley was mistreating the baby. The neighbours say that they could hear the baby screaming at all hours. Varley once took the baby to a former colleague of his, and at this point the baby's arm was, or one of the baby's arms was in a cast, and Varley told this woman that he had been thinking about smothering or suffocating the baby, but then reassured the woman that he would never actually do any such thing. And the woman therefore did nothing. She didn't report Varley to the local authority, the social services or anything. Varley's mother had a lot of time with the baby. She would have seen, at the very least, the bruises on the baby's face. He forever had those. And I imagine that she would have done things like washing and changing and dressing the baby, and therefore she would have seen all the bruises and injuries that the baby had all over the rest of his body. There were 3 emergency visits before the moment that I've told you about, 27th of July 2023, that Varley and McGowan-Fazakerley made to hospital with the baby, and the baby would be brought in not breathing properly, having a seizure, having a broken elbow. Hospital staff did report Varley to the police the very first time he brought the baby in, but the police believes the cock and bull story that Varley fed them about how the baby had sustained his injury. And also social workers came round to see the baby after the third emergency visit to hospital and just left the baby with the couple. Not only did McGowan-Fazakerley know full well what Varley was doing to the baby, on the 23rd of July 2023, so 4 days before Varley unalived the baby, McGowan-Fazakerley joined in an act of SA with Varley against the baby. On the 27th of July 2023, after pushing his thing into the baby's mouth and keeping it there so long that the baby couldn't breathe, Varley put the baby on the bed and spent the next hour and 45 minutes recording the baby, documenting the baby's struggle to breathe and recover until the point when the baby went into cardiac arrest. The infamous emotional meltdown that Varley staged when, after rushing the baby to hospital with McGowan-Fazakerley, after making the baby stop breathing in the first place and then filming the baby's agonised demise for an hour and 45 minutes, he was told about an hour after they got there that the baby couldn't be revived, was of course just an act. He couldn't have cared less about the babies having passed away, but he of course wanted to appear grief-stricken. In reality though, he was just gutted that out of the blue he had lost his favourite SHX toy, something that he hadn't counted on doing just then. And furthermore, he knew that he was done for. He knew that he was going to end up in prison, and he was visibly and audibly grieving for himself because of that. What's curious about that hospital moment, of course, is the fact that we don't see McGowan-Fazakerley. Where was he? I fear that he may have been at the baby's side. On the other hand, by that point the baby had gone, so he wouldn't have known that one of the two men who had put him where he was by his side, if that's where McGowan-Fazakerley was.
No. John! Your son needs you.
He doesn't need me. He doesn't need me. It's my fault. I left him literally 2 minutes when I went and got changed.
Jamie.
He was in his chair.
Jamie, your son needs you.
The man initially told hospital staff and the police that the baby had accidentally drowned in the bath, but less than a week later the police told him that the post-mortem showed that the baby hadn't drowned but had in fact died from acute obstruction of the upper airways. However, it took the police, despite all the video evidence that they had, 2 years to gather enough evidence to bring charges against both Varley and McGowan-Fazakerley. And in those 2 years, the two men went and moved into this £450,000 home that they closed on 22 days after the bleep RDER of baby Preston. And they were really friendly with their neighbours and with the children of their neighbours, giving them treats at Halloween and Christmas. And the whole world thinks that they were effectively grooming the children so that they could do to at least one of those children what they had done to the 13-month-old baby boy that they were meant to have been looking after. Well, that's what we all think. We can't prove it any more than we can prove that the two men were selling the pictures and videos that they made of baby Preston on the dark web. A lot of us have been saying that that's what they potentially did, but there's no reported proof of that. In June 2026, for the murder of Preston Davey, along with a range of other offences, Varley got a whole life order and got sent to HMP Wakefield, probably the most dangerous prison in the country. Meanwhile, McGowan-Fazakerley was apparently first taken to HMP Manchester, which many people still call Strangeways, before, for whatever reason, being rapidly transferred to HMP Full Sutton. In HMP Full Sutton, he is held currently on a segregation wing for his own protection. Don't know how long that's going to last. It could be forever or until he gets out, if he does. However, wherever abouts in the prison he's being held, in his position, as I mentioned earlier, I'd be a lot less concerned about the prospect of riots taking place in the prison than I'd be about the fact that Paul Fitzgerald used to be in this prison, and so did Richard Huckle. And you see, the thing about Richard Huckle, while working as a Christian missionary out in Malaysia in 2005 to 2006, and then again in 2010 to 2014, Huckle raped a number of very, very, very young people, aged to be exact, from 3 to 13. The man also made dozens of indecent images of those sorts of people and created a PDF file manual to help others commit the same disgusting crimes. He got banged up in England in 2016 for a total of 25 years. However, he only got through the first 3 years and 4 months of that sentence, the man having been found dead in his cell at HMP Full Sutton on the 13th of October 2019. All because Paul Fitzgerald, who was himself an SHX offender, subjected Huckle on that date to a lengthy torture, which included binding Huckle's hands and feet, gagging his mouth, and strangling the ex-missionary with an electric cable, graping the man, breaking his jaw, penetrating him the back way with a kitchen utensil, and then stabbing a pen with a blade attached to it into the man's brain via his nose. In addition, Fitzgerald later admitted that he had wanted to cook and eat part of Huckle's body following the attack. If you happen to be discerning some extremely disturbing parallels between Paul Fitzgerald's act of murder against Richard Huckle and the act of murder perpetrated by Robert Maudsley against a child you-know-what offender in Broadmoor Hospital in 1977, you're not the only one. If, on the other hand, you don't know what I'm on about, I will leave a link to the story of Robert Maudsley in the description box below. Getting back to Fitzgerald's act of murder, I don't know why he did it. After all, the man himself was hardly an angel. Furthermore, I don't know how he was able to do what he did without being caught. All the acts of torture and violence that he perpetrated against Huckle must have taken a few minutes, I would say. Where were the prison staff? In any event, after being convicted of Huckle's murder and getting knifed with a minimum of 34 years, Fitzgerald was promptly shipped out to HMP Longlartin in Worcestershire. McGowan-Fazakerley then can have no fear of coming across Paul Fitzgerald anytime soon. But the thing is, HMP Full Sutton is full of Paul Fitzgeralds. So if ever McGowan-Fazakerley does have any sort of contact with any members of the general population, he had better watch his back. Our next two HMP Sutton house guests seem to see themselves as vigilante murderers. Watch for the crazy twists. First though, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, like, comment, subscribe and donate. And for a £2.99 monthly membership, you get some cute little perks and you get to support my channel even more if you want to. If so, do sign up now. Up until around late 2025, both Lee Newell and David Taylor, two murderers, were in fact at HMP Wakefield, also known as Monsters Mansion. However, they had to be moved out because of what they did on the 4th of November 2025, which was to murder Kyle Bevan, a man who was doing a 28-year minimum term life sentence for murdering the 2-year-old daughter of his former girlfriend. The murder of child killer Kyle Bevan at Wakefield Prison, which unravelled on the 4th of November 2025, came less than a month after the murder in the same prison of former Lost Prophets vocalist Ian Watkins. On the night in question, Mark Fellows, Lee Newell and David Taylor followed Kyle Bevan 2 landings up to his cell, all the while trying not to make it look obvious that they were following him. They did follow him. They followed him into his cell, they cornered him, and then jointly they stabbed him 25 times. It's not clear who stabbed him, how many times, who struck the fatal blows. It's believed that at least one of them would have been holding Bevan by the arms to stop him from defending himself. In any case, in the eyes of the law, it doesn't actually matter who exactly did what. The murder of Kyle Bevan was planned, prepared and carried out by the three people that I've just said, and that makes them all equally and jointly liable for the man's murder, and they all now stand convicted and sentenced for the murder of Kyle Bevan. David Taylor always used to boast about being able to make weapons out of more or less nothing, so it's believed that he's the one who both made and supplied the weapons for the murder. After they finished killing Bevan, the three perpetrators positioned him on his bed to make it look like he was sleeping so that his murder wouldn't be noticed by the prison staff, or screws, as many of us like to call them, until at least the following morning. That said, it's not known whether any of the three told any of the other prisoners what they were planning to do to Bevan, but as soon as they finished killing him and then positioning him to make him look like he was asleep, they started running their mouths off, telling everyone what they'd done. And yet, incredibly, prison staff didn't actually find out about Bevan's murder until the following morning, and they found out because someone told them. Bevan knew that he was a marked man because of what he was in prison for. He always used to keep himself to himself and on many occasions asked to be locked in his cell. In court, the judge said that the three men targeted Bevan specifically because he was a child murderer, and that placed him beneath them, even though the three of them themselves were murderers. None of them had ever murdered a child. And in fact, one of the three had previously murdered another inmate at another prison who was doing life for the murder of a child. I'm about to show you which one of the three perpetrators that was. With regards to the motive behind the murder of Kyle Bevan, again, where Mark Fellows is concerned, it's thought that his act against Bevan was a protest. A few weeks before he murdered Bevan, or rather took part in the murder of Kyle Bevan, he had requested a transfer out of Wakefield because he hated the regime there. He is still there, by the way, so he's gained absolutely nothing from what is his third act of murder. So he wanted to go basically to a nicer prison. And yeah, of course, we're all here thinking, you killed two people, that's why you got sent to prison on a whole life order, and you're asking for a nice home for the rest of your life. Seriously, you need to have your head examined. In 1989, at the age of either 20 or 21, Lee Newell got life with a minimum of 23 years for the murder of 56-year-old Mary Neal, a neighbour of his over in Norwich, East Anglia. He'd asked Mary for money, but she'd said no. However, he was no less able to trick his way into her home. Once he got in, he strangled Mary to death and then nicked a bit of money from her. He was sent to HMP Long Lartin, where he became friends with Gary Smith, who was himself doing life with a minimum of 22 years for the murder of Ali Hassan, a 22-year-old man. In February 2013 at HMP Long Lartin, Lee Newell and Gary Smith entered the cell of Subhan Anwar. He was doing life for the murder of the toddler daughter of his former girlfriend. Newell and Smith wrapped Subhan Anwar's tracksuit bottoms around his neck and literally squeezed the life out of him. As a result of that murder, both perpetrators had their life sentences replaced with a whole life order. In November 2014, Newell himself was nearly murdered by fellow double murderer and fellow whole life order prisoner, 6'7" giant Gary Vinter, who viciously and repeatedly kicked the man in the head. Newell lost an eye in his attack from Vinter, as well as sustaining many other serious injuries. And, shockingly, in 2021, he got £85,000 compensation from the Ministry of Justice for his injuries. Vinter, meanwhile, got 18 years for his act of attempted murder against Newell. But again, for a whole lifer like him, that just doesn't matter because he was never getting out anyway. As for Newell, as we can all see, despite only having one eye, he clearly hasn't lost any of his murderous touch. When David Taylor took part in the murder of Kyle Bevan, he was actually on remand on charges of attempted murder and murder. In late 2021, Taylor formed a relationship with a very young woman by the name of Alicia Alpostov Boyarin. She was vulnerable, she was an alcoholic, and she suffered from depression. She lived with her grandfather most of the time, and she had the habit of befriending strangers to get money and a roof over her head. However, by the end of January 2022, Taylor had got tired of her and was trying to break up with her. Elisa was only 24. She was as such more than 30 years younger than David Taylor. She went missing about February 2022, and Taylor took steps to conceal the fact of her disappearance, and in line with that, the young woman's body has never been found. Before his act of murder against Elisa, Taylor had already done time for an offence of aggravated burglary. He was sent down for that under an indeterminate sentence for the protection of the public, IPP, on the 31st of August 2007. When he was eventually released from that sentence, he was quite soon called back to prison for offences of possession of ammunition and, of course, for the murder of Elisa. The man pleaded guilty to Elisa's murder in February 2026, which was after he had taken part in the murder of Kyle Bevan, and shortly before he was due to stand trial for Elisa's murder. As for the man's act of attempted murder, this is something that he did in July 2024 while he was at HMP Frankland. He asked to speak to a police officer in prison, saying that he would help the investigation into Elisa's murder. However, it was just a setup in order to carry out an attack against the police officer. And sure enough, when the police officer got there and interviewed him in the prison, Taylor stabbed him in the area of his heart using an improvised weapon, the sorts of things that he can make out of nothing, and he's good at doing that. And he injured the officer so badly that the man could have died. However, he not only didn't die, he made a full recovery from the attack, thankfully. Now listen to this. For the murder of Elisa, Taylor got life with a minimum of 20 years. For the attempted murder of the police officer, he got 30 years. He got longer for an act of attempted murder than for an act of murder. However, because of his involvement in the murder of Kyle Bevan, he got a whole life order, so he's just never getting out of prison now anyway. Taylor, Newell and Fellows were all sentenced for the murder of Kyle Bevan on the 19th of June 2026, the very day after Jamie Varley got a whole life order for his act of murder and other offences against baby Preston Davey. Newell and Fellows were both already on a whole life order, so the whole life order that they got on the 19th of June 2026 just means that they are now sitting under 2 whole life orders. No, you haven't seen the worst of HMP Full Sutton, because now we've got the case of the Sunderland Strangler. In the early 1990s, the city of Sunderland in the northeast of England was gripped by a specific localised terror. It wasn't just that teenage boys were disappearing, it was the way that they were being found. They were being found mangled and loaded into the belly of abandoned buildings. For a time, both authorities and the public were misled by the very signature of the killing. You see, Stephen Grieveson didn't just kill, he attempted to incinerate the truth. Between 1993 and 1994, 3 teenage boys, all from the same school in Sunderland, were found dead. Thomas Kelly, 18, David Hanson, 15, and David Grief, 15, were all discovered in derelict properties or allotments. Cruelly, the initial investigations were clouded by the locations of the bodies. Because the boys were found in abandoned hangouts and because their bodies were badly burned, there was a tragic assumption that their deaths were accidents, for instance coming from glue sniffing or other kinds of solvent abuse gone wrong. It was only after the 3rd murder in quick succession that the pattern became undeniable. These deaths weren't accidents, they were murders. Grieveson would lure his victims to secluded spots, usually derelict houses that he knew well, and then murder them. To ensure that no forensic evidence remained, the man would then set the victim on fire. Well, he would set their dead body on fire and also burn down the surrounding area. The breakthrough in the investigation came not from a brilliant piece of detective work, but from Grieveson's own recklessness. The man was arrested for a simple robbery and arson at a local school. When police compared his fingerprints and his movements to the sites of the murders, the neighbour from hell began to look like a serial killer. In 1996, Grieveson was convicted of the 3 murders and he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 35 years. Now, the most disturbing aspect of Grieveson's acts of evil had to be the man's motive. During his trial, it was revealed that he was in the closet. He was struggling with his homosexuality, and he murdered his 3 victims either to silence them after having sexual encounters with them, whether those encounters were consensual or not, I can't say, or to prevent them from outing him. For nearly 2 decades, Grieveson sat in prison with a deadly secret. In 1990, 3 years before the known murder spree attributable to Stephen Grieveson, 14-year-old Simon Martin had been found murdered in a house in the Sunderland area. The case had gone cold, but the signature was there. A teenage boy, a derelict building, blunt force trauma. In 2013, after decades of DNA analysis advances and mounting pressure, Grieveson finally confessed to having murdered 14-year-old Simon Martin. He claimed that he'd done so after losing his rag because he was worried that the boy would tell people that they had done the thing together, and that would have meant that everyone would have known that Grieveson was gay. This 4th life sentence finally closed the book on a spree that had haunted Sunderland for a generation. Today, Grieveson lives in jolly old HMP Full Sutton, which is anything but jolly. Our next HMP Full Sutton resident is one of the 2 men who were known as the Railway Grapists, but they didn't stop at grape. David Mulcahy and John Duffy, the railway grapists who then became the railway killers, met at school in the 70s. They had both come from Irish Catholic backgrounds, their families having moved over to England for work opportunities. They went to Haverstock School in Camden. There was an occasion where they played cricket using a living hedgehog as a cricket ball. They got suspended for that, but they didn't care. They left school and went into jobs like carpentry and painting and decorating. They, at one moment in the early 80s, decided that they would attack, specifically Grape, a woman whose home one of them had just done some work in, but she came home that night with a guy, so they didn't do that. However, they soon made it up to themselves by doing a load of other grapes before going on to commit 3 murders. They did their grapes, that was their first stage of offending, around, of course, railway stations, because they found it easy to target young women in those areas, and they knew those areas really well. They focused on stations in the north of London, like Hendon and places like that. They would ambush women and they were just merciless towards them. They used to drive around looking for victims, and they'd play really exhilarated music to get themselves into the mood, and then they would pounce once they decided on a target. Duffy was caught first, and he was caught on his own. You see, he had started to commit grapes without Mulcahy, and there was a moment in the mid-80s where he was in a park in North London stalking this woman, looking to grape her. However, there was a policeman there as well, and he was able to catch Duffy before he could attack the woman, and Duffy's crimes all unravelled from there. I should tell you that both men were married and had kids, but that just didn't matter to them. They loved graping young women, and they committed 3 murders together before Duffy was caught. And they said the reason they proceeded to murder was because grape had stopped satisfying them. They needed something more violent, more cruel, and more evil. Together, the 2 men murdered 19-year-old Alison Day, 15-year-old Marta Tamboza, and 29-year-old Anne Locke. The case against Mulcahy finally came together in the late 90s thanks to two major things. After years of silence, after years of not reporting against his former partner in crime, Duffy talked. And also, in addition to that, forensic technology had improved significantly by that point anyway, so it's very likely that the police would eventually have got Mulcahy anyway. Mulcahy was arrested in 1999 and police were able to match his DNA to samples preserved from the original crime scenes. In 2001, following one of the longest and most expensive trials in British history, Mulcahy was convicted and was sentenced to 3 life sentences with a recommendation that he should serve at least 30 years. I should tell you that Duffy himself was given a whole life order. I can't answer why Mulcahy too didn't get a full life prison sentence. However, according to people in the know, he's never getting out. There's no way, given his many acts of rape and his 3 acts of joint murder, that he's ever going to win parole. For our next HMP Full Sutton monster, murdering young women wasn't enough. He needed to defile them and degrade them and dominate them even after he killed them. On the morning of the 12th of November 2002, mother of 2 Heather Barnett was, inside her own home, bludgeoned repeatedly with a hammer, and she also suffered a cut to her throat that ran from ear to ear. Her body was found with her breasts having been cut off and placed next to her head, her bra having been cut open at the front for her breasts to have been chopped off. Her jeans were unfastened and slightly pulled down, with her upper clothing pulled to the level of her breasts. In her left hand was a bunch of her own hair, while in her right hand was a bunch of someone else's hair, her right hand having been placed on her lower abdomen. Heather was a self-employed seamstress who worked from her home in Bournemouth, South England. She had a 14-year-old son called Terry and an 11-year-old daughter called Caitlin, and she got on with her children's father, who she had long since split up with. She also had no known enemies, and her front door showed no signs of forced entry. But she also had a neighbour called Danilo Restivo, who had a fetish both for sitting behind young women on buses and illicitly and secretly cutting off pieces of their hair, and for murder, Heather Barnett having been the man's second murder victim. Born in April 1972 in Sicily, Restivo, who's known as the hairdresser of Potenza and whose distinctive physical features include his bulging eyes, a point that becomes important later on, came over to the UK in March 2002 and moved into a rented room in the home of an Italian lady by the name of Fiamma Marsango, who he had met online. Fiamma's home was at 93 Chatsworth Road on the corner of Capstan Road, and it stood approximately 20 yards directly across from the home of Heather Barnett. Heather and Restivo were acquainted with one another before Restivo murdered her, but according to an ex-boyfriend of Heather's by the name of Rodney Brown, Heather was scared of Restivo. Notwithstanding, on the 6th of November 2002, Restivo went round Heather's asking her to make a set of curtains for his landlady to go in her room as a Christmas present for her, and I should tell you that by this stage, Restivo and Fiamma had become more to each other than landlady and houseguest. It was attested, however, at some point that Fiamma's room was a total dump, with rain coming in through the roof and with mould, so one wonders how much of a priority getting new curtains would have been to her. Anyway, once Restivo left again, Heather noticed that her spare key was missing, forcing her to have the locks changed. In an email to her sister, she explained that she thought that Restivo had pinched the key. When, on returning home from school on the day that their mother was murdered, Terry and Caitlin found their dead mother's body, which, having been dragged from Heather's sewing room after the murder, was lying on the bathroom floor. They were, after running into the street hysterical and shocked, taken in by none other than Restivo and Fiamma. Fiamma, though, had nothing to do with Heather's murder. Upon their initial investigation, police were convinced that the killer was local and had some sort of connection to Heather and to her children, and that the person also lived in close proximity to Heather, because no one had noticed any strangers around the area that morning. Then again, there could have been strangers, but people just hadn't spotted them. But also, From the timing of the attack, namely shortly after 8:37 a.m. when Heather got back from taking her kids to school, the suspect appeared to know Heather's routine. Police noted how Heather's murder had been planned with chilling precision, including the killer being incredibly forensically aware, having worn gloves, as the man did, and having brought a change of clothes with him, leaving behind only a green towel of his own that was stained with his blood, and which actually was never used as something that could lead to the man's being charged for Heather's murder. But don't worry, because eventually he, of course, was charged with Heather's murder and convicted of it and is rotting away in prison even as we speak. Heather's post-mortem took place the following day, and it was conducted by a man called Alan Anscombe. Heather had 10 separate injuries to her head, one of those injuries having been so severe that it had penetrated through her skull, exposing brain tissue. On the front of her abdomen there was a vertical shallow interrupted cut, 24 centimetres in length, as well as 2 other injuries. With blood located in her windpipe and infraalveolar bleeding, it was thought that the blood had entered her lungs, potentially as she took her last gasps of breath. As well as head injuries, Heather had received other wounds, which Anscombe recorded as not having been random and having appeared to have been inflicted with care and control. Heather's throat was cut all the way across, with an incision made from 2 centimetres below her right ear all the way over to her left ear. This cut had penetrated right down to her spine, cutting all the way across her airway and across the arteries. It appeared, furthermore, that a shallow knife had been cut down Heather's abdomen for a length of 24 centimetres. Anscombe believed that a knife or some other sharp instrument was used to cut Heather's breasts off, noting that there was nothing to suggest any great skill had been used, unlike where some of the other injuries inflicted on Heather were concerned. Police also noted that there was a discoloration on Heather's knickers, which were more pronounced on the inside of the knickers than on the outside, which suggested that they had been caused by something blood-soaked. A microscopic examination of the discoloration revealed a pattern that appeared to have been created by a knitted garment. Restivo became the prime suspect in Heather's murder 6 months after the murder, when police discovered the man's connection to the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl by the name of Elisa Claps from 1993 back in Restivo's hometown of Potenza. The details of Elisa's own story are coming up soon. In their subsequent surveillance operation of the man, whose findings were quoted against him when he stood trial for Heather's murder, they caught him stalking and staring at women and having in his car a change of clothing like the one that he had taken over to Heather's when he murdered her, gloves, a balaclava and a number of bladed weapons. None of this, however, was evidence for the man's guilt for Heather's murder, so for now police couldn't touch him. What they both could and did do, however, was to contact numerous people who had close relationships with the man and warn them of the potential threat to their lives coming from the man. When Fiamma Marsango got her warning, though, she ignored it, and that's not the only thing about her partner that she ignores, as you'll soon hear. One of the 6 times that Restivo brazenly cut off some hair belonging to a random young woman who was on the same bus as him was witnessed by a man called Mark Goddard, who described Restivo as having bulbous eyes, remember those, spectacles and dark hair, and recounted that the man had sat behind the girl, pulled some of her hair under the metal handrail on the chair and rested it on his lap. Both the hair and his hand were underneath the anorak that he'd been wearing, but which he'd since taken off, and it looked to Mark as if the man was methingy baiting. On the 17th of March 2010, nearly 17 years after she went missing, the mummified body of 16-year-old Elisa Claps was found in the loft of the Most Holy Trinity Church in the town of Potenza. Elisa hadn't been even remotely attracted to Restivo, who had, in the months before he trapped her in the church and stabbed her to death, been pestering her for a date. But she was a very kind-hearted and compassionate girl, a devout Catholic in fact, who didn't like to see the youth feeling hurt. When she agreed on the 11th of September 1993 to go and meet him at church the following day, she had laid aside her fear of him, which she had disclosed to her big brother Gildo more than once before then, to spare his feelings. And then the following day, when she went to meet him, she told her family that she was just going to Mass. She took her friend Eliana Di Chilis, I've probably mispronounced that, sorry, with her, but asked her to wait by some phone boxes outside for the half hour that she expected to be inside the church with Restivo, and Eliana agreed to that. What then went undiscovered for the next 17 years was Restivo's act of stabbing Elisa 9 times from behind and 3 times from the front, including to her back, neck and breasts, going as far as the anterior part of her thoracic vertebrae. The waistband of her trousers was hitched up above her waist, and the zip had been lowered and the jeans had been opened, while the young lady's bra had been undone and cut between the cups, and also her knickers were cut as well. After killing her, the perpetrator cut off some of her hair and left it near her hands. As you're seeing, Restivo had something to him that made him degrade his 2 victims in a very similar and a specific way after killing them. Fetished or fetishized acts of murder being what the man clearly perpetrated, to go with his vastly less violent fetish, it would seem, for cutting off hair belonging to young women that he didn't know without either their permission or their knowledge. The discovery of Elisa Claps' body is what, in May 2010, 2 months after the discovery, enables police at long last to charge Restivo with the murder of Heather Barnett, which led, in turn, in June 2011, to the man's conviction for the murder of Heather Barnett. In November of the same year, the man was found guilty over in Italy and in his absence for the murder of Elisa Claps and was sentenced to 30 years, which of course he'll never do because we've got him over here doing time for the murder of Heather Barnett. The man lost his appeal against both that conviction and his conviction for Heather Barnett's murder. What he did win, though, was a sentence reduction coming from the fact that the judge had counted his murder of Elisa Claps as an aggravating feature in his sentencing decision before Restivo was found guilty of that earlier murder. In this way, Restivo got the whole life term that he was given for Heather Barnett's murder quashed and replaced with a 40-year minimum term instead. Then again, when the Court of Appeal announced the man's new sentence, they warned him that he would probably still be locked up for the rest of his life, his chances of ever winning parole with those 2 horrific murders behind him being virtually nil. Restivo is actually suspected of being a serial killer who is behind the disappearances of 7 other women from a range of European countries. Whether any of those disappearances will ever be proven to have come from him, however, remains to be seen. He and Fiamma are still together, in case you want to know, and since Fiamma still lives where she was living when the man that she got married to in 2004 murdered Heather Barnett, she has to travel all the way up to Yorkshire to visit her husband, who's doing his time at HMP Full Sutton, a Category A prison. Alright, so former Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick didn't actually ever kill anyone, but trust me, he's got loads in common with, well, who do you think? The conviction of former Metropolitan Police Officer turned kidnapper turned rapist turned murderer Wayne Couzens marked the beginning of the end for another Metropolitan Police Officer, David Carrick. David Carrick was known to his victims by the chilling nickname B-Bleep A-S-T-A-R-D. Carrick didn't just operate in the shadows, he operated from within the most elite branches of the Metropolitan Police. For nearly 2 decades, he used his warrant card as both a shield from suspicion and as a weapon of intimidation. Carrick joined the Metropolitan Police in 2001, eventually rising to become an armed officer within, listen to this, the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch, which was the same unit that Wayne Couzens, who kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard, was in. Carrick's job was to protect the heart of British democracy, but in his private life he was a serial predator. Between 2003 and 2020, Carrick carried out a relentless campaign of sexual and USC. His method was a masterclass in manipulation. He'd meet women socially or through dating apps and present himself as a witty, wry professional. But once he got into a relationship with the woman in question, he would exert total control over every area of her life. He monitored his victims on cameras in his home. He weed on them. He told them when they could and couldn't sleep, and even told them what they were allowed to eat. And trust me, he only ever allowed them a very limited menu. In some of the most harrowing evidence presented in court, it was revealed that Carrick frequently locked women in a small cupboard under the stairs of his home in Stevenage for hours at a time. Carrick's greatest weapon, as you might imagine, was his power. When victims attempted to resist his bullying and his violence or leave him, he would remind them that he was a police officer, and he would likewise tell them, "No one will believe you over me." And he used that to convince them that he was the big man, he was untouchable, he was bulletproof. The wall of silence, though, finally broke in October 2021. That, you see, was when Couzens got his whole life order for what he'd done to Sarah Everard, and that prompted one of Carrick's victims to go to the police and report Carrick. And that report from that one woman opened a floodgate of reports and complaints against David Carrick. And the rest is history. This is him when he got busted by his colleagues.
These are the necessities that I've just explained to you.
No necessities. Well, keep going.
Well, that's one of three, one of four. So, okay. Well, I'll allow you to get some clothes.
What is it you're searching for?
Articles relating to the offences
in St Albans
in 2020. This is the allegation that's been made to us. Okay, sir.
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
So I've been a police officer for 20 years.
Right. David,
do you want me to come naked like this?
No, just understand you're under arrest, okay?
I'm under
just
arrest.
Explain to us, what do you need?
Hold it like this. Don't worry about it.
Can one of my colleagues go and get you stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to? Yeah.
Which one's yours?
It's the back one.
Okay.
Are you in the address on your own?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Where are your keys then? We'll bring those at least. Okay.
In 2023, Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 charges, including 24 rapes and numerous other offences as well. However, the horror didn't end there with those women who'd been in relationships with Carrick. In November 2025, Carrick was brought back to court for historic crimes and was found guilty of the essay of a 12-year-old girl in the late 80s when Carrick was himself just a teenager. And he was also found guilty of the rape of another former partner of his that he'd been with between 2014 and 2019. By the end of his trial, he'd been handed a total of 37 life sentences. His home is jolly old HMP Full Sutton, and he often appeared during his trial by video link in court from Full Sutton. He'd wear a suit and tie. He would shake his head at the testimony coming from his victims. He won or earned a minimum term of over 30 years and won't be eligible for parole until at least May 2052, if he survives until then. We're now leaving HMP Full Sutton behind and moving over to HMP Frankland. And my question is, do we finally know why Ian Huntley was clubbed to death in a recycling workshop at HMP Frankland in February 2026? I hear on the grapevine that the reason that Anthony Russell savagely attacked and fatally attacked, in fact, Sowen murderer Ian Huntley in the recycling workshop at HMP Frankland on the 26th of February 2026 was because Huntley owed him 900 quid. Can't confirm that, it's something I saw on TikTok. So why was Huntley in prison in the first place? Why was Anthony Russell in prison in the first place?
It's just very upsetting, you know, to think that I might be the last friendly face that these two girls had to speak to.
On the 4th of August 2002, 10-year-old best friends Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, who came from Soham in Cambridgeshire, East England, were just on their way to buy some sweets when they passed the house of someone that they were vaguely familiar with. That person's name was Ian Huntley, and the reason that Holly and Jessica were vaguely familiar with him was because his girlfriend, Maxine Carr, was a teaching assistant at their school. Huntley told them that Maxine was inside and asked if they wanted to come and say hello to her, and trustingly, having no reason to be afraid, the two girls entered the home to say hello to their teaching assistant. Maxine at this point was up in Grimsby visiting her family, so no, she wasn't inside at all. It's thought that only moments after the two girls entered Huntley's home, the man killed them by strangling them. To add insult to the most devastating of injuries, Huntley went on TV to appeal for the safe return of the two girls, to say how sad he was about their disappearance, especially the fact that his was probably the last friendly face that they saw before they were snatched. He also displayed a missing poster in the window of his home, again appealing for information about the whereabouts of the two girls. And in case you're wondering, the man's girlfriend, Maxine, was in on it. Huntley had told her quite soon afterwards what he'd done, and he actually apparently wanted to confess, but Maxine wouldn't let him. Huntley was a caretaker at a school, and when you're a caretaker at a school, you often get accommodation because you have to do really difficult hours. And Maxine wasn't prepared to lose that home just because her boyfriend had, oopsie daisy him, committed 2 child murders. For falsely alibying Huntley, as she went on to do, Maxine got 42 months, but only had to do half that. Huntley himself got 40 years. When the man was at Wakefield, he was jugged by fellow murderer Mark Hobson. In case you don't know, being jugged means having boiling water thrown over you. And there's a variation where the person perpetrating the act adds sugar to the water, because that does way more damage than boiling water alone. When Huntley was later moved to HMP Frankland, he had his throat slashed by an inmate by the name of Damien Fowkes, who was in for robbery. Apparently, Huntley thought he was going to die as a result of that attack. However, he was back in prison the very same day after being treated, to be exact, being stitched up at hospital. Our question now is, who is Anthony Russell, and why did he do what he did to Ian Huntley on the 26th of February 2026? In October 2020, Anthony Russell killed 3 people in the space of a week and attacked a further 2. His first victim was his mate David Williams. He thought that David was sleeping with his woman, so he killed him. But David wasn't sleeping with his woman. Russell killed his mate for nothing. And then when David's mother, Julia, went looking for her boy and asked Russell to help her look for him, at first Russell pretended he was helping her look for him, but then he killed her as well. After that, the man ran away to Leamington Spa. He got talking to a couple. The woman was called Nicole McGregor. She was 31, and in the course of Nicole, her boyfriend, and Russell getting to know each other, Nicole and her boyfriend had revealed to Russell that Nicole was 5 months pregnant. Later that day, Russell got Nicole to come with him to get some drugs from him because, in case he hadn't already worked it out, this was what it all came down to. Russell was out of his mind on drugs. He was a lifelong user of heroin and cocaine. So Nicole, just like Holly and Jessica, not having any reason to fear, fully trusting Russell, went off to a secluded part of Leamington Spa with Russell late that night. Russell r'd Nicole, and then, likely to stop the woman talking, he murdered her. On either side of Nicole's murder, Russell attacked an elderly person and robbed them. In the case of the man's second victim, which was after he killed Nicole, he stole the man's car, and it was in that car that the police found him. Russell is doing 3 whole life orders, 1 for each of the murders that he committed. He got that sentence in March 2022. So whether it was over the 900 quid that Huntley apparently owed him, as I say, I can't confirm that, or whether it was over something else in the days leading up to Russell's attack on Huntley, the two men who were on a vulnerable persons wing or a segregation wing at HMP Frankland, A wing, had been having a go at each other all the time, shouting at each other. And then on the 26th of February 2026, they were in the recycling workshop and they apparently just had a scrap. And then there came a moment when Huntley's back was turned, and this was when Russell started whacking Huntley on the head with a 3-foot long spiked metal pole that he had got from a waste metal crate, and then he'd made the spikes. I don't know how he was able to make spikes. I don't know how he was able to do that without prison officers seeing and stopping him. He hit Huntley on the head at least 6 times with his weapon. When prison officers rushed in and dragged Russell away and saw Huntley on the floor, they thought that Huntley was already dead because literally his skull was split in half. It took the man a few days to die. In the early hours of the 7th of March 2026, his life support machine was switched off because doctors said the man was in a vegetative state. Just because he was conscious, that was no indication that he wasn't actually in a vegetative state or that he was actually going to recover. There was no hope whatsoever of recovery. And then later on the 7th of March 2026, he died. 900 quid. I'll say it once again, I don't know if that was the reason why Russell did what he did to Huntley. In case you're wondering how prisoners can get that sort of money in prison, a prisoner can earn money through a job. Ian Huntley, for instance, himself had a £20 a week cleaning job, and that is why he was in the recycling centre at the moment of Anthony Russell's attack on him. They can have money sent in from family and friends, and certain prisoners, for instance, will receive payment in exchange for allowing others to access certain areas of their body. So there is money to be had in prison. At the time of this recording, Russell was due to stand trial for Ian Huntley's murder in November 2026, and the trial was expected to last approximately a week. I have no idea why the man has bothered to plead not guilty, because that's the reason he's getting a trial. By all accounts, he'd done it. He was never getting out of prison anyway, so I honestly don't see what he's got to gain by going to trial. After Ian Huntley got a club to the head, killer cop Wayne Couzens expressed his fear, reportedly, that he would be next. Sir, after what you did, you've got no right to even hold that fear, never mind express it. Killer cop Wayne Couzens was complaining about the threats against his life that he has suffered even before the murder of Ian Huntley, which took place in the prison where Couzens is held. Then again, how could the man have expected not to end up in prison after doing what he did back in 2021 during COVID? On the night of the 3rd of March 2021, Couzens got out of his hire car in Clapham, South London, went up to a random woman on the street who happened to be a 33-year-old marketing executive called Sarah Everard, falsely arrested her for breaching COVID restrictions, and then drove her all the way down to Kent, raped her in some woods, and then strangled her to death with his very police belt. The man exposed himself to every street camera between Clapham and Kent. He'd booked his hire car in his true name and used his mobile phone in the area where he raped and murdered his victim. This guy was a police officer who knows how police catch criminals. And yet, he genuinely got the shock of his life when, 6 days after he did what he did, his colleagues came for him in relation to Sarah's disappearance, and likewise, having been totally unprepared for that moment, he improvised the most stupid cover story for his act of kidnap that you've ever heard in your life.
Well, I am in financial shit. And I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. There's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know.
The one truth that the man told his fellow coppers was that he was broke. God only knows what he was spending his Metropolitan Police officer salary on though, or was his salary just not enough to support a family of 4 down in Kent? A skint copper can be kicked out of the force or just not be allowed to join in the first place, since having money problems makes a copper susceptible to taking bribes. What also came out after the man's conviction was that he had committed a number of acts of flashing, was addicted to extreme you-know-whatography, and tried to get his colleagues to watch that sort of stuff as well. And he's once run away from home and gone missing, and I mean as a married father of 2, another behaviour for which a copper can be sacked. Couzens appealed against his whole life order, a sentence that means that a prisoner is never getting out, on grounds that he just didn't deserve to be locked up forever. The appeal court said, yes you do, and duly rejected his appeal. So frankly, the man had better get used to having his life threatened, because he's going to be locked up until he dies. And there is every chance that he will be fatally attacked by any one or more of his inmates, just like the Surham guy. Levi Bellfield targeted young blondes for his murderous violence, and that's not the only twisted thing about him. Levi Bellfield is literally evil by name. Born in 1968, he's a serial killer, a sex offender, a rapist, a kidnapper and a burglar. He's also a woman beater. He had numerous relationships which spawned him, I think, 10 or 11 children, and many of those relationships collapsed because he used to beat the you-know-what out of his girlfriends and wives. He was married to some of them and just living with others just as a boyfriend and girlfriend set up. In 2008, he was convicted of the murders of Marsha McDonnell and Emily de la Grange and of the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy, and he got a whole life order. And then in 2011, he was found guilty of the murder of schoolgirl Millie Dowler, and he again received a whole life order for that murder as well. So he's got 2 whole life orders, and he was in fact the first prisoner in the UK to receive 2 whole life orders.
Did you get a kick out of being involved in these sort of inquiries?
No comment.
Do you think it's a macho type of thing to be here?
No.
Do you think it will help your notoriety?
No comment.
Do you honestly believe that your actions over the 21st and the 22nd of March 2002 are the actions of an innocent man?
No comment.
Then are you an innocent man?
No comment.
Because if you are, tell us.
No comment.
And give us that explanation for where you were and what you were doing.
No comment.
Are you able to do that, Levi?
No comment.
Sarah's told you what she believes you did that particular day, and I wholly support what she says. I believe you took her off the street that day. I believe your motivation was sexual, and I believe you took her back to Collingwood Place, and I believe you killed her there. That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
That's what happened.
No comment.
And then you've used the day of next year to move her body. Is that the truth?
No.
So that's what's happened, isn't it?
No comment.
And then sometime over the following few days, you've driven down to Hampshire, an area that you know, and you've dumped her body.
No comment, sir.
That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
He once, as a child, had SHX with a rabbit, and afterwards he broke the rabbit's neck. His original surname was none other than Rabbit. RABBETTS. He used to sleep with his mother. I don't think they did the thing together, but they used to sleep in the same bed for many, many years. I think well into Levi's teens. And whenever he used to go home and see his mother as an adult, again, he used to sleep in the same bed as her. She wiped his body bot for him until he was around 12. And he also, before he took to murder, was alleged to have committed a number of essays against young girls when he worked as a nightclub bouncer. But even though the man is as thick as you know what, somehow he was always able to destroy the DNA evidence that he left behind, and so he was never caught. And the police in many cases didn't take the allegations from the girls who came forward about him seriously. A lot of them took drugs and stuff like that, and the police really just didn't care. In 2009, at Wakefield Prison, a fellow inmate attacked Bellfield with a makeshift weapon. Even though Bellfield only suffered minor injuries, in 2014 he was awarded a compensation payout of £4,500. In 2016, at HMP Frankland, the man's current home, another inmate lunged at Bellfield with a shank. The man was able to slash Bellfield across the face with his shank, but then, after a struggle, Bellfield was able to get the blade off the man, and then prison guards came in and split the altercation up anyway. It turns out that the blade only narrowly missed the man's left eye, Bellfield's left eye, but it did leave a nasty cut which has caused a scar. This time, however, Bellfield didn't get a penny in compensation. I am wondering, however, about the size of the person who attacked Bellfield, because Bellfield himself is 6 foot, vastly overweight, and his neck is massive. It's about 20 inches wide. Bellfield's prison hobbies include writing to the scores of women who have become his pen pals, getting engaged to one of them, dealing drugs, pretending to be a Muslim, and shit-stirring. The man, as I say, was engaged to one of his female admirers, and they were going to get married. When Labour came into power in 2024, they hastily brought in legislation to ban people on a whole life order getting married. What Labour didn't know, even though it wouldn't have made the blindest bit of difference to them, is that Bellfield and his mystery woman had already broken off their engagement by then anyway, because they'd come to realise that they wouldn't have been able to cope with not having a proper sexual marriage. As for Bellfield's hobby of drug dealing and, as I say, shit stirring,
Bellfield's been running that wing for a long time. Debt collector, meets up with other main wing prisoners at the Muslim services to pass on messages to people that have run over from the normal wings onto the protection wing, owing debts over there. He goes there, collects it, goes to the Muslim service and brings it back for them like a little Joey boy, and then they'll pass on other information what they'd like him doing, and he likes playing that part as the big bully and the enforcer kind of thing. He can't get done on Frankland at the moment, and he is a child killer, and it has only been happening to child killers in recent times, right? But what everybody, you're all getting the ump about, and I'm getting the ump about, how come a child killer and a lady's serial killer Bellfield has the run of that wing? It's a protection wing, it's a vulnerable wing. He's the biggest on there. He's the big bully guy. He wouldn't be able to do that on the main wing. How's he getting away with it? The screws, these bodies obviously giving them information as to what's going on. They're turning a little blind eye. All right, will you give us him and we'll give him them.
Prisoners will often convert to Islam just for the convenience, because it enables them more time out of their cell. They can go to mosque and mix with other prisoners, and it gives them protection from Muslim gangs. It's known as being a convenience Muslim. They also get better food. In July 1996, down in Chinnington in Kent, Lynn Russell and her 6-year-old daughter Megan were bludgeoned to death. Lynn's 9-year-old daughter Josie was also viciously attacked, but she managed to survive. Serial offender Michael Stone has been doing life for those two murders and attempted murder. However, in July 2026, the CCRC came to see him in prison to get a DNA sample from him, and they were due to return a few days later to get a DNA sample from Levi Bellfield. Bellfield confessed to the murders of the Russells several years ago, and police looked into it but couldn't find any evidence to link Bellfield to the murders, so they dropped it. However, they're looking into it again, and according to police officer turned investigative journalist Mark Williams Thomas, that can only mean that there is something in Bellfield's confession. Bellfield is doing a whole life order, as I've mentioned, so he's clearly got nothing to lose by getting more murder convictions. The question is why? Why bother? Does he suddenly have a conscience, and care that someone else is doing time for a crime that he himself committed? Or is he just after more notoriety and infamy? David Fuller prefers his great victims dead. And if they aren't already dead when he gets to them, guess what he does?
Hello. Morning. David, it's the police. Hello. We need to come and speak to you. Oh, yes.
Presenting hospital maintenance worker, husband, father of 4, burglar, PDF file, rapist and double murderer David Fuller.
David, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987. Do you understand? You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned.
This December 2020 arrest of David Fuller, who was born in 1954 and comes from Kent, South East England, was no less than 33 years in the making. The man's murder of 25-year-old Wendy Nell having come in June 1987, while his murder of 20-year-old Caroline Pierce came in November 1987. Taking place in Tunbridge Wells, Kent. Owing to the sort of place where each of the two victims lived, the two murders became known as the Bedsit murders. The acts of rape that Fuller was found to have perpetrated against both Wendy and Caroline most likely came after the two women died, which prefigures, if you like, the hobby that the man rapidly developed in his many years as a maintenance engineer at two Kent hospitals. Of the 102 corpses, all female of course, that Fuller raped and essayed in the CCTV lacking mortuaries of the two said hospitals, the youngest was but 9, while the oldest was 100. In the videos that the perpetrator made of these disgusting acts of his, he's seen placing his thing, let's say, inside the mouths, the A bleep USES and the VA bleep INAS of these bodies. I am disguising certain words because of YouTube's decency policies. The man also used his tongue and fingers in his acts, graping and essaying some of the corpses repeatedly over a number of days. This is the moment where the perpetrator sheepishly confesses to his acts of rape against the dead bodies held in his place of work.
I want to admit I am admitting the offences, but I don't really want to go into detail.
Yeah. Okay.
We appreciate that.
So they asked him why he did what he did and other things like that, and he said at one point, who cares about the victims? They were already dead. Yeah, we know that, but for instance, when one relative of one of the bodies that he violated found out what he'd done, they killed themselves. And there's this other woman who spoke to the news about what the effect of what the man had done to her daughter's dead body, her only child, had on her. She was totally devastated, as you might imagine. In the raid of Fuller's home, police found numerous images downloaded from the internet showing women and girls who'd been raped and or murdered. They also found no fewer than 4 million indecent images of you-know-what sort of people. As for the man's career as a burglar, this unravelled between 1973 and 1976, the man gaining dozens of convictions for that offence in that period. The police finally got on David Fuller's scent, thanks, as you might imagine, to advances in DNA analysis. They used, to be exact, an analysis technique known as familial DNA, and they used that against the fingerprints, the footprints, the white source sample, if you see what I mean, and the saliva samples coming from the two murder victims, Caroline and Wendy, and the results led them to David Fuller. In December 2021, after his trial was cut short when he changed his plea to the charges of murder relating to Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce from not guilty to guilty, Fuller got a whole life order. The two murders were, of course, the lead offences, but the man was also sentenced at this point for his mortuary-based hobby and for downloading indecent images of you-know-who. In November 2022, though, the man pleaded guilty to and was sentenced for a further 16 counts of necro thingy. As you can see, though, at this point, the man had nothing whatsoever to lose. Michael Adebolajo killed in answer to God's very call. On the afternoon of the 22nd of May 2013, a British Army soldier, drummer Lee Rigby of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, was attacked and killed by Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale near the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, South East London. Both men were Muslim converts, and their murder of Lee Rigby was an act of protest against the atrocities, as they saw them, being committed by the British Army against citizens of Muslim countries. 29-year-old Adebolajo was found guilty of Mr Rigby's murder on the 19th of December 2013, and so was Adebowale. Adebolajo, however, held a greater share of liability for the murder of father of one Mr Rigby, such as is reflected in his sentence compared to that of Adebowale, the sentence details coming soon. The youngest of Adebolajo's 6 children, a little girl, was but 4 days old when, alongside an accomplice, her father went and ran over an innocent man who happened to be in the army before hacking him to death with knives and with a cleaver. In response to the arrival, around 5 minutes later, of armed police officers, the 2 murderous maniacs, who were armed with a gun as well as with the said bladed articles, charged at the police. As a result of the gunfire that they each suffered from the police, the 2 killers were hospitalised, Adebowale having had one of his thumbs shot off. In contrast, and thankfully, no police officers were harmed. The calm and coherent way in which Adebolajo explained during his first court appearance his motives for his horrific act, revenge for the killing of Muslims overseas by British soldiers, as I mentioned earlier, offered a stark contrast to the notably stilted but no less bravado-laden speaking that he did in his police interview.
We decided to wait in the vicinity of the barracks that is in Woolwich. By the qadr of Allah, by Allah's decree, whilst waiting to find a soldier, because between us we decided that the soldier is the most fair target, because he joins the army with kind of an understanding that your life is at risk when you join the army, you know. So we sat in wait, and it just so happened that he was the soldier that was spotted first.
On the 26th of February 2014, at the Old Bailey, Adebowale got life with a minimum of 45 years, while Adebolajo got his whole life order. In a rather shocking piece of news, 4 years later, Adebolajo expressed regret for doing what he did to Lee Rigby. He said his justification for his act, coming as it did from the Quran, was a misinterpretation of the Quran and that he'd been brainwashed. Lee Rigby's mother, though, whose name is Lynn Rigby, rejected his apology and said that she'd never forgive him. Damien Fowkes might be a nasty armed robber, but he's got his principles, you know. Ask the bloke that he topped in prison. Having been locked up for the offence of armed robbery, Damien Fowkes has long since gained a reputation in prison for being a no-nonsense punisher. Where he can, he hurts fellow inmates who have hurt children. Around 2011, he got 20 years added to his sentence for slashing the throat of double child killer Ian Huntley in HMP Frankland. That act of his put Huntley in hospital, and in that act of his, attempted murder in other words, Fowkes used a homemade weapon on Huntley while Huntley was working, quite ironically, on the healthcare wing of the prison. For essaying a number of boys between 1991 and 1992, Colin Hatch did less than 2 years. On getting out, he promptly went and committed, in January 1994, the S-bleep-Eweley motivated murder of 7-year-old Sean Williams. In exchange, in 2011, Fowkes barricaded himself and Hatch into a cell on D Wing at HMP Full Sutton and told prison officers that he wouldn't kill Hatch as long as the prison officers stayed outside. The officers dealt with the matter as a hostage situation, but Fowkes did kill Hatch. He strangled him using strips of bedding as ligatures. Before killing him, Fowkes had told the prison officers, quote, "He's a nonce," he doesn't deserve to live. And then he said after that child offenders, quote, just do my head in. It was the same when I did Huntley, unquote. The man was convicted not of murder though, but of manslaughter. It was somehow then successfully argued in court that Fowkes never meant to kill Hatch. Of course, in October 2016, over in HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire, Fowkes himself nearly died when 49-year-old Kevin McCarthy slit his throat. This happened when McCarthy grabbed Fowkes from behind and cut his throat with a homemade blade while lunch was being prepared on the day in question, the 2nd of October 2016. There was no clear motive for the violent assault, but some prisoners had complained about McCarthy not taking his turn to clean the kitchen earlier that morning. This was the third time that McCarthy had tried to murder a prisoner, the man having been locked up for attempted murder and having convictions stretching back to 1990. Michael Parr and Nathan Mann didn't do what they did to Mitchell Harrison in 2011 out of justice, even if their victim was a dirty bar steward. 23-year-old Mitchell Harrison was a serial SHX offender who, in 2010, got an indeterminate sentence for raping a 13-year-old girl who we'll call Maria. Harrison lured Maria to his flat in Kendal in Cumbria. Once he got her inside, he ordered her to strip before raping her twice. That was the third time that Harrison, who was originally from Wolverhampton, had been in trouble for essaying girls. When he was 13, he got a formal warning for indecently assaulting a 7-year-old. And when he was 15, he was taken to court for threatening to rape a 15-year-old classmate of his. In October 2011, Harrison was found in his cell with his intestines hanging out. He'd been disemboweled. Before ripping out Harrison's guts, Michael Parr, aged 32, was doing life for the attempted murder of a hospital patient. Nathan Mann, meanwhile, was doing 24 years for a double murder. That act came in 2007 in the course of the perpetrator's burglary of a nursing home in Leicester. After climbing into the building through an unlocked window in order to steal some booze, and God only knows why he broke into such a place as a nursing home to get his hands on booze, the 20-year-old landed in the room shared by two women, Rashmi Badiani, 56, and Radhaben Chaun, 72. Both women had been stroke victims and had health problems that needed round-the-clock care. Radhaben could only move her left hand. Mann smothered her and battered Rashmi on the head, ending both their lives. Mann was arrested just days after the murders, and it was revealed that he was actually on bail over assault charges at the time of the murders. As regards Harrison, in court it was revealed that Mann and Parr had expressed fantasies about beheading other prisoners and cutting out their stomachs, the two men having planned to eat Harrison's liver after slicing the man open once he was dead, but not having done so. Their murder weapons consisted of razor blades melted into toothbrush handles. Mann was described by a psychiatrist as a remorseless, callous psychopath who harboured cannibalistic urges and was one of the most dangerous men in the criminal justice system. Sentencing the pair for the ghastly and gruesome killing, Judge Mr. Justice Openshaw said, "I can't envisage circumstances in which either of them will ever be released." Parr got life with a minimum of 32 years and may never win parole, just like the judge said. Meanwhile, having been convicted not of murder but of voluntary manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility, Mann got life with a minimum term of 16 years to run consecutively to the 24-year minimum term that he's already doing for his earlier double murder. Again, the idea that the man will ever win parole is highly unrealistic, thankfully. Time for a change of scenery now, so let's head on over to HMP Durham, where the first antagonist that we meet committed a murder and then did the unthinkable. Around 6 p.m. on the 18th of January 1993, 16-year-old schoolgirl Claire Tiltman leaves her house, which is in Greenhithe in Kent, southeast England, and heads to her friend's house. Half an hour later, she's lying on the ground in a small dark alleyway in a never-expanding pool of blood because she's just been stabbed all of 9 times. When she's found, emergency services are immediately called, but the girl, an only child, bleeds to death before they arrive. Now, just because it took over 2 decades to nail the person behind Claire's murder, that doesn't mean that the man in question had walked free for all that time, because, as you've probably just worked out, Claire was by no means the man's only victim. Police naturally mounted an extensive investigation into Claire's murder. They appealed nationally and had Claire's picture on front pages of newspapers. They got thousands of tips, but nothing that led anywhere. The case then went cold until a breakthrough in 2013, when, as part of a renewed cold case review, Kent detectives searched the home of Colin Ash-Smith. There, they found some evidence that led to the man's arrest, his charge, his prosecution and his conviction for the murder of Claire Tiltman. Colin Ash-Smith was in prison at the time of his arrest for Claire Tiltman's murder, and it was all because in the early evening of the 17th of October 1995, meaning 2 years after he murdered Claire, he attacked a 21-year-old woman by the name of Charlotte Barnard as she was walking down the street in Greenhithe. He carried out the attack at a place that was only 360 metres away from where he murdered Claire, and he did what he did to Charlotte for the same reason as he did what he did to Claire, because it was fun. As in the case of Claire, the man stabbed Charlotte several times, 8 times in the back and once to the right flank. Charlotte also got stab wounds to her right hand because she'd of course tried to defend herself against Ash-Smith with that hand. After the man finished attacking her, he left her for dead and got away in his car, and then he went home where he lived with his girlfriend of the time. Luckily, Charlotte survived, and both Ash-Smith and his car had been seen in the vicinity by witnesses who reported the sightings to the police. Ash-Smith was then arrested that very same night. When they searched the man's home, police found records of an attack that the man had carried out in December 1988, in which he'd kidnapped a 27-year-old woman at gun and knife point from outside her home in Swanscombe, which is in Kent. He then forced the woman, who we'll call Lucy, to walk to a quarry where he attempted to grape her in various positions and then attempted to murder her, first by strangling her and then by stabbing her in the back 5 times. He then left her for dead and went home. Fortunately, Lucy survived. Ash-Smith, however, as we've seen, got away with that attack for many, many years. After being arrested for the attack on Charlotte, Ash-Smith at first denied everything before eventually admitting to the attacks on both Charlotte and Lucy. For those attacks, the man was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years. When, in September 2013, police searched the perpetrator's former home, they found a copy of a local newspaper that marked the first anniversary of Claire's death. This was quite obviously a trophy that the man had kept in order to celebrate what he'd done to Claire. What's even more perverse, though, is that the killer went to Claire's funeral. He mingled with the other mourners, looking all ashen-faced and sad, while, on the inside, he was celebrating his disgusting act, enjoying seeing the effects of what he'd done to his victim. I should mention at this point that when Ash-Smith was arrested for Claire's murder, Claire's parents had since died. A hugely important piece of evidence against the perpetrator in his trial for Claire's murder were some confessions that he'd once made to a cellmate of his, which the man reported and which included details to the murder that only the murderer would know. The man's previous convictions also went against him. When, in December 2014, the man got his 21-year minimum term for Claire's murder, having of course been found guilty, he was 46 years old. His subsequent appeal against his conviction, which was based on the fact that the judge had wrongly allowed bad character evidence against him to be heard, was rejected. Durham Prison is ageing, overcrowded, violence is a daily feature, and substance abuse is rife. It was in fact a mixed prison up until 2005. Presumably though, the men and the women were kept in completely separate buildings. In 2005, all the women were moved to other prisons to deal with the problem of overcrowding and because of the high rate of suicides. We've still got at least one mixed prison today, HMP Peterborough, but again, men and women are kept in completely separate buildings. Our next Durham prison inmate is a sadistic brute whose capture was no less than 3 decades in the making. On the 8th of October 1992, the body of Nikki Allan, a 7-year-old girl from Sunderland in northeast England, was found in a derelict building in a high street. Her body had 37 stab wounds and her head had been bashed with a brick so many times that her skull was totally shattered. She also bore evidence of a possible SA. While the wronged man was subsequently charged with Nikki's murder, the true killer, of course, sat back and kept quiet. Nikki lived on a council estate in Weregarth in Sunderland with her mother, her stepfather, her sister and her 2 half-sisters. On the 7th of October 1992, after leaving her grandfather's flat, which was on the same estate, around 8:30 in the evening, she disappeared. The basement of the derelict Quayside Old Exchange building in High Street East is where, the following day, her body was found. George Heron, though, didn't murder Nikki. He only confessed to having done so after denying it no fewer than 120 times because the police forced him to do so. This was exactly why the trial judge ruled the man's taped confession inadmissible, which, along with other things, led the trial to be cancelled. Who did kill Nikki then? In February 2014, 22 years after the murder, a serial killer by the name of Stephen Grieveson, who was already in prison for murder, was arrested on suspicion of Nikki's murder. However, the case against him soon collapsed because there just wasn't enough evidence to push a case. But then, on the 17th of April 2018, Northumbria police raided a house in the Stockton area of Teesside and arrested a man on suspicion of Nikki's murder. The man was called David Boyd and he was 54 years old at this point.
Yeah, hi, how are you doing? From this? No, from the police, come have a word? Yeah. Cheers. Can you do us a favour and just knock the telly off for a second? What? Can you do us a favour and just knock the telly off just so you can hear what I'm saying? Thanks, mate. Dude, I'm Terry, this is Marty. We're part of the team that's re-investigating the murder of Nikki Allan. Yeah. Okay. Part of that investigation has led us to suspect that you may have had some involvement in that, okay?
I have no involvement.
So I'm arresting you on suspicion, okay, of that offence. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Just leave your phone there.
In June 2022, Boyd appeared at Newcastle Crown Court via video link and pleaded not guilty to Nikki's murder. So why did the police think that Boyd had done it? At the time of Nikki's murder, Boyd had been the partner of a lady called Caroline Brampton who occasionally babysat Nikki. The police had found some of Boyd's DNA on Nikki's clothing. It turned out, furthermore, that Boyd knew the layout of the old Exchange building where Nikki's body was found, and that he had used the same window through which the building had been accessed, apparently, a few days before Nikki's murder, when he took a boy there to search for pigeons. And additionally, at the time of Nikki's murder, in other words, not long after Nikki's body had first been discovered, Boyd was questioned by the police that he'd lied to them about where he'd been at the time of Nikki's murder. He told them that he'd gone out to buy fish and chips an hour before he actually did do that.
There's a window there that looks half boarded up, or maybe 3/4 boarded up.
Yeah, go for it in there, in the middle.
You would go into that, alright. How high is that? Because it's difficult from a picture to view. Can you remember how high that is to get into?
Well, I couldn't tell you.
You can't remember?
I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine.
I know it's pretty high because I pulled myself up.
Right. So you had to physically pull yourself up there. Okay, and you would have been, what, 25 at the time?
Yeah.
Like a grown man, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember that being quite high?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said Colin was just a kid?
Yeah.
So how did Colin get into there?
Lift him up, wouldn't I?
You lifted him up?
Yeah.
Right. Can you remember doing that?
No, not really. I suppose that's how he got in.
Right. Okay.
A further compelling fact against Boyd, though, was the fact that he'd been convicted in March 2000 of the indecent assault of a young girl at a park in Stockton. That assault took place on the 8th of April 1999. The man had also been convicted of breaching the peace back in 1986. That was an incident in which he'd approached 4 children in Sacriston, County Durham, and grabbed a 10-year-old girl. When, in May 2023, Boyd was found guilty of Nikki's murder, we learned that the man had lured Nikki over to the old Exchange building and that Nikki wasn't necessarily scared of the man as I mentioned earlier, she vaguely knew him. Once the man got Nikki inside the building...
You took her into that rough ground where you sexually assaulted her, or at least attempted to do so. Nikki was heard screaming at around 10 p.m. by Mrs. Osborne, who was in her flat overlooking High Street East. You struck Nikki across the face, causing her lip to bleed. You did this to shut her up. Before or after this, there must have been some sort of a struggle between you as Nikki's anorak came off and she lost both of her shoes. From the moment of her letting out those screams, Nikki's fate was sealed. You decided to kill her, to silence her and to prevent her from telling anyone that you had sexually assaulted her or had attempted to do so.
After bludgeoning and stabbing to death the little girl, Boyd then dragged her body by the ankles down the staircase into the cellar of the building, the little girl's head bouncing from stair to stair, leaving traces of blood and fibres on the risers. Even after George Heron's acquittal for Nikki's murder, as the years went by, Boyd may well have felt confident that he'd got away with murder once and for all. Unluckily for him, however, the science of DNA analysis was advancing. New developments led the police to identify traces of, this is something whose meaning I've got no idea of, YSTR DNA, which matched Boyd's profile on the t-shirt. The DNA that I'm talking about was on the t-shirt and leggings, that Nikki had been wearing the night she was murdered. Whilst it's not as specific as autosomal DNA, no idea what that is either, the YSTR DNA profile was nonetheless sufficiently incriminating where the killer was concerned.
You must have inflicted upon her unimaginable terror in the period before that fatal assault. You then took steps to cover your tracks by hiding the body to the extent that you could within that building and by advancing your false alibi whilst another person stood trial for the murder which you had committed.
Nikki, the way she was murdered, and I've had to listen to it, it's horrendous. I kind of think in my brain how bad it is. And I thought life would have meant life without parole. I've been let down again by the justice system.
On the 23rd of May 2023 at Newcastle Crown Court, Boyd got life with a minimum of 29 years. Since the man was around 59 years of age at this time, there's every chance that he'll just die in prison. Our next Durham prison inmate killed 5 people in the space of 24 hours, and the whole country hates him. Why, in the year 2000, did Lee Ford, a builder and roofer, murder his wife and her 4 eldest children? When Leslie Wyatt, who was born in April 1964, met Lee Ford, she was a divorced mother of 4. She met Lee Ford in 1990. The two got to know each other, got to love each other, and by 1991 they were married with a baby son. However, cracks soon started to appear in the marriage. For a start, early on in his relationship with Leslie, Ford stopped Leslie's ex-husband, Michael Tranter, from seeing his 4 kids, except once in a while. Moreover, the man increasingly showed controlling, coercive and possessive behaviour towards his wife, stopping her going out unless he approved of where she was going, and telling her what she could and couldn't wear. Moreover, that coercive, controlling verbal behaviour turned into violence. He used to bash his wife up. In 1995, Leslie left Ford and she took her children with her. She went to a caravan in Cornwall near to her mother. However, it was through Leslie's very mother that Ford found out where Leslie and the kids were, and he went right down there to get them all back, and he succeeded. Not only did Leslie and her kids go back to Ford, not long after that, to be exact in 1997, Leslie gave birth to her second child with Ford, a daughter. After that, in an obvious attempt to isolate Leslie further, Ford moved the whole family to the small village of Carnkey in 1998. Not long after the move, however, Leslie began to suspect that her husband had been essaying her two eldest daughters, Sarah Jane and Anne-Marie. She even approached social services due to her suspicions, but no action ended up being taken. And then, between late August or September 2000, Ford and Leslie got into a very heated argument. Don't know what it was about. It could be related to the alleged essay that Ford had been perpetrating against Leslie's two eldest daughters, or it could have been about something completely different. But in any event, as a result of that argument, Ford battered his wife with a rounder's bat. And then listen to this. After that, he reportedly made Leslie a cup of tea and added some painkillers to it. But then after that, he went to the garage, got some rope, wrapped it around his wife's neck and strangled her to death. What is alleged to have happened after that is that the man then murdered his 4 stepchildren one by one over the next 24 hours, again by strangling them to death with a rope, just as he'd done to their mother. He then buried the 5 bodies in the woodshed of the house. The question, of course, is how was the man able to commit the next 4 murders in the 24-hour period in question in the way that I've described? Altogether, there were 6 children in the family. Where were they all at any point in the 24 hours in question? How was Ford able to go to one, strangle that person to death, go to the next one, strangle the next person to death? Did he even do it in one such way? How did he do it? The answers to those questions, I just don't know. On noticing the disappearance of Leslie and her 4 oldest children, Leslie's family and friends, of course, reported those disappearances to the police. The police started investigating, of course, and it wasn't long before they grew highly suspicious of Lee Ford. When they initially questioned him, though, the man said that his wife had just left him and taken her 4 oldest children with her, and that was that. He had no idea where she was. However, after that initial questioning by the police, at which point they left Ford alone, they didn't arrest him or anything because they didn't have any evidence against him, because at the point when they first questioned him, they hadn't found any bodies. The man then went and moved the bodies of the eldest 2 girls, Sarah Jane and Anne-Marie, from the woodshed of his house to a potato field about 6 miles away. It was those 2 bodies that the police found in early October 2000, at which point they went back to Ford, arrested him and had him confessing more or less straight away to the murders. But what Ford didn't do was to say why he had committed the 5 murders, the murder of his wife and the murder of his 4 stepchildren. Despite having confessed to all 5 murders, Ford no less initially pleaded not guilty to the charges of murder. However, on the very first day of his trial, the 24th of May 2001, he changed his plea to guilty. He got 5 consecutive life sentences with a minimum term of 35 years. And before we all clamour that that was way too soft, can you believe this? That term was then reduced to 27 years. I would have thought that the man would have got a whole life prison sentence. He's actually going to be able to apply for parole in 2027. Do you agree, though, that 27 years as a minimum term for all of 5 murders is a total insult to the victims? I am trusting that you do. However, I'm interested in your answer, even if it isn't the one that I expect. Do let me know what your answer is in a comment. And if you don't agree that 27 years isn't long enough, I'm interested in why you think that. Let me know in a comment. You could say that our next Durham prison inmate didn't get on with coppers, and he's got the murderous record to prove it. In July 2010, 37-year-old Raoul Moat, a man with a reputation for violence, went on a killing spree in which he shot 3 people, killed 1 and wreaked all sorts of havoc for the people in the community of Tyne and Wear in the northeast of England. Moat was a panel beater, a bouncer and a tree surgeon. Between February and July 2010, the man served an 18-week sentence in Durham prison for assaulting a 9-year-old relative. I'll repeat that, a 9-year-old relative. A former bodybuilder, Moat was 6'3" and weighed approximately 17 stone or 108 kilograms or 238 pounds. And as I say, he had a reputation for violence and was prone to, quote, eruptions of anger. The man had a young daughter with his ex-girlfriend, Samantha Stobbart. Keep her name in mind. She was 22 at the time of the shootings. And the man also had 2 other children from a previous relationship. Even though Moat had been arrested all of 12 times, resulting in charges for 7 separate offences, he only had 1 previous conviction for common assault, and that was the conviction that got him his 18-week sentence. Moat hated the police. Why? He blamed them for the collapse of his business, claiming that he had lost everything. While he was in prison, his ex-girlfriend Samantha lied to him that her new partner was a police officer, but she only did so because she was frightened of Moat and she thought that making him think that her new boyfriend was a police officer, which he wasn't, would keep the man away from her. Moat is known to have posted threats to police and to others on social media shortly after being released from prison. He made further detailed threats in 2 subsequent letters and in several phone calls to police, stating that he had no intention of harming the public but would continue to shoot police officers until he was dead. So clearly those threats came after he first shot a police officer. And speaking of which, the man was released from Durham prison on the 1st of July 2010 and allegedly arrived in the early hours of the 3rd of July 2010 at a house in Birtley. In that house were Samantha, his ex-girlfriend, and her new partner, 29-year-old karate instructor Chris Brown. According to Moat himself, crouched under the open window of the living room for an hour and a half, listening to Samantha and Chris making fun of him. At 2:40 a.m, Chris left the house to confront Moat because clearly by then he'd become aware of Moat's presence. However, he was shot at close range by Moat with a shotgun and was killed. Moat then fired through the living room window while Samantha's mother was on the phone to the police. Samantha was hit in the arm and the abdomen and she was taken to hospital to undergo liver surgery, and when she was in hospital she was immediately put under armed guard. She survived. At 12:45 a.m. on the 4th of July, PC David Rathband was shot by Moat while he was sitting in a police vehicle on the roundabout of the A1 and A69 near East Denton. Rathband was rushed to Newcastle General Hospital in a critical condition with injuries to his head and to his upper body. According to The Guardian, Moat had called the police 12 minutes before shooting PC Rathband to taunt them and tell them what he was about to do. And then he did the same again about 50 minutes after doing what he did to Rathband, during which he showed no remorse and complained that the police weren't taking him seriously enough. Police responded by saying that they were taking him seriously and that Chris had no connection to the police. They urged him to hand himself in for the sake of his 3 children. So it was only at that point that the man learned that he'd been had. His ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend wasn't a police officer, but you think that stopped him? Think again.
Hello there, this is the gunman from Birtley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I've done what I've done, right? Now, my girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night, the karate instructor, right? Been on to me, right, for years. He's hassled us, harassed us, he has just won't leave us alone. I went straight 6 years ago when I met her, and I've tried my best to have a normal life, and you just won't let up, right? You won't leave us alone for 5 minutes. I can't drive down the street without the blue cracking lights, you know? You have stitched this up for years, you've been caught stitching this up. So the fact of the matter is, right, that she's having an affair with one of your officers. Was he not a police officer, I wouldn't have shot him.
Okay.
That, right? But the thing is, you know, it's been going on for a while. I went to jail, right?
Okay.
I was stitched up by you for hitting the kids, which I didn't do, right?
Right.
I went to jail for something I didn't do. Now, I could have took a community order, right?
Yeah.
But what happened is me and Sam had a discussion with the barrister. I went to jail. Within 3 to 4 weeks, the barrister promised us and let us down. She said she would have us on a retrial, get the not guilty, so me and my son would live together. Half went to jail, right?
Hang on a minute, because you're losing me there, yeah.
Right? Well, I went to jail longer than I should have done for something I didn't do, right? Which justify that in your own head, right? And meanwhile, while I'm doing that for my missus, she's having an affair with one of your officers, right? And then when I come out, right, she's winding us up saying that he's going to stitch us up using him, right? And, you know, that he's this, he's that, he's going to, because he's a multiple backbed, he's going to kick the ass all over the place.
Okay,
you know
okay.
Right? And I've had nothing but grief from her. I've had a good relationship with her for 6 years, which is why we've stayed together. I've gone straight, I've got a total legitimate life with her, I've opened a business, and I've been shafted. And you police have took too much off me over the years. You won't take a look, and now you think you can take your missus. Now, I didn't mean to shoot her like that, right?
Okay.
Right? They deserved it, right? But she, right, you can see from the ballistics I've been altering those cartridges, right? That one was only half the powder. It was only meant to get a compensation, because obviously I'm not going to be around in a few days, right? It was meant to just give her a little injury so she can get loads of compensation.
Okay.
For you separate the bed. Now that I found out she's critical, I'm not happy about it. I didn't mean that. You know what I mean? To be honest, I'm quite surprised she is critical. You know? But I didn't mean that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not coming in a lie. Yous have hustled me for so many years. They come anywhere near me and I'll kill you. I've got 2 hostages at the minute, right? Come anywhere near me and I'll kill them as well. I'm coming to get you. I'm not on the run. I am coming to get you.
The manhunt for Moat became one of the largest that the UK had ever seen. A total of 160 armed officers were deployed to find the man, and that represented approximately 10% of all the police officers available in England and Wales at any one time. Under mutual aid arrangements, Northumbria Police is able to call on reinforcements from other forces by paying the donor force for the assistance given. The 100 specially trained armed response officers of Northumbria Police were reinforced by an additional 40 from London's Metropolitan Police and another 20 from Cleveland, Cumbria, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Humberside, Strathclyde and Greater Manchester combined. On the 7th of July, at least 10 armoured anti-terrorist vehicles from the Police Service of Northern Ireland were transported by ferry and provided to Northumbria Police for the operation, the Hunt for Moat. The Ministry of Defence confirmed a Royal Air Force Tornado GR4, fitted with a Raptor reconnaissance pod, was deployed to do nighttime sweeps with an infrared camera around the Roughbury area. And if by any chance you think I know what the hell a Raptor reconnaissance pod is, or what the Royal Air Force Tornado GR4 is, or just about anything else that I've said is, think again. On the 5th of July, fearful of more shootings by Moat, police mounted a raid with armed officers, dogs and a helicopter on a house in North Kenton, and they also detained a man from Sunderland, although neither action resulted in them finding Moat. What did come to light around this time, though, was that Northumbria Police had received a 49-page letter, originally given by Moat to a friend of his late on the 3rd of July, warning that the police were, quote, going to pay for what they've done, unquote. The letter also stated that, quote, the public need not fear me, but the police should, as I won't stop till I'm dead, unquote. In that same letter, Moat stated that his children, his freedom, his house, his ex-girlfriend Samantha and their daughter had all been taken from him. He admitted that he had issues and that he was running out of options, but he stated that he was never violent towards his children. Let me just remind you, though, that the 8-week prison sentence that he served was for his conviction for attacking in some way a 9-year-old. That person wasn't one of his children, however, he or she was still a relative of his, and he or she was still a 9-year-old child, for crying out loud. Clearly, Moat didn't come to see that what he said he'd lost was all down to him, all his own stupid, violent fault, but of course, we're not talking about a rational person. Anyway, the police relayed a message to Moat from Samantha through the media, in which Samantha urged Moat to stop, and that he should stop if he still loved both her and their child. Samantha then admitted that she had lied to Moat about her new boyfriend being a police officer, and she openly stated that she had only told that lie because she was scared of Moat. Sam's half-sister reported that Moat had updated his Facebook status meanwhile with a hit list which included her and other family members. Quote, he said he will take out any police that get in his way, unquote. That is what Samantha's half-sister said. At a press conference on the evening of the 5th of July then, police revealed that they believed that Moat had kidnapped 2 men at the time of the shootings. They also requested that this information should be subject to a media blackout, so it wasn't made known at the time. Around 10:50 p.m, a fish and chip shop at Seaton Delaval was the scene of an armed robbery by a man resembling Moat. In a press conference on the morning of the 6th of July, the police said that they believed that they had been dealing with a, quote, complex, fast-moving hostage situation. On the morning of the 6th of July, a house in Reckenton was raided by the police and a man was detained. Following an appeal for sightings of a black Lexus IS 200 SC saloon bearing the registration V322HKX, which is believed to have been used by Moat, the car was found near Rothbury. A 5-mile air exclusion zone and a 2-mile ground exclusion zone was then set up by police, and 2 men were found walking along a road and were initially thought to be hostages, but were in fact later arrested. Police also said that officers from 6 forces had been called into the area. A large number of armed response officers were in their ranks. Armed officers and dogs stormed buildings on a disused farm called Pike House after a tip-off from the landowners, who said that one of the boards on the windows of the derelict building had been removed, but nobody was found there. The police repeated an appeal to Moat directly just to give himself up and urged him not to leave his children with such distressing memories of their father as they would have if the man didn't at least just hand himself in and face his punishment. That appeal, of course, failed. Armed officers were deployed to schools across the area, and pupils were kept under temporary lockdown for fear that Moat might be close by. But eventually children were allowed to go home. The cordon around Rothbury was lifted at approximately 9 p.m, while armed patrols continued throughout the village and vehicles were subjected to road checks whilst entering and leaving. All of this upheaval to find one man with a gun whose next act nobody could predict, although the next act would have been more murders, specifically of police officers. And then, in the early evening of the 9th of July, residents of Rothbury were told to stay indoors because a major security operation was taking place. Now listen to this. At one stage, former England footballer Paul Gascoigne, known in the media as Gazza, arrived at the crime scene claiming to know Moat and offering to bring him chicken and lager in an attempt to convince him to surrender. Gascoigne was, of course, denied access to the fugitive, and it was later revealed that Gascoigne was drunk and high when he did what he did. And it's since been rumoured that Gascoigne also wanted to persuade Moat to go fishing with him, and that he had, in fact, in his state of drunkenness and being high, mistaken Moat for his friend. He could have been Gascoigne's friend for all we know, because after all they did have a lot in common, you know, both enjoying beating up people who were smaller and weaker than them. In case you don't know, when he was married, Paul Gascoigne beat his wife black and blue. When, on the 9th of July, police found Moat in open space and recognised him and contained him. Moat had been on the run for all of 6 days, and I'll tell you this now, he hadn't been acting alone. He had some accomplices. I'll get into that soon. When Moat was contained in the open by the police, there was a standoff between the man and the police because Moat still had his gun and it was loaded and it was functioning. After nearly 6 hours of negotiation, Moat was shot with a taser. However, it had no effect on him. However, the man then shot himself in the head, and he was later pronounced dead at Newcastle General Hospital. Were the acts of Raoul Moat inspired by the events in the Cumbria shootings which had taken place 1 month before Moat's own rampage? In the Cumbria shootings, taxi driver Derek Bird had killed 12 people and injured another 11 in a day-long shooting spree. The saturation level news coverage of the Cumbria shootings may have triggered Moat, given the timing of Moat's own killings. Research by American forensic psychiatrist Park Diet has demonstrated that, in a country the size of the US, such coverage, quote, causes on average one more mass murder in the next 2 weeks, unquote. The theory that mass media coverage prompted copycat offences because it gave killers infamy was also supported by Kate Painter, a criminology expert at the University of Cambridge. In addition, the media was also accused of glamorising Moat by describing him, for instance, as having a hulking physique and being a notorious hard man, while providing less coverage about his victims. And I need to tell you about one of his victims, and it won't be the one that you expect. To commit the shooting of PC David Rathband, Moat had enlisted the assistance of 2 men, and those 2 men, namely Colin Ash and Khurram Awan, are, as I record this, rotting away in prison on life sentences. What did they actually do? They literally walked around with Moat, helping him find police officers to shoot. Ness, who was aged 26 at the time, got 3 concurrent life sentences with a minimum term of 40 years, and those offences were for the murder of Christopher Brown, Samantha's new boyfriend, because he had actually been with Moat in the moment when Moat murdered Christopher Brown and then shot Samantha. Also for conspiracy to murder and for the attempted murder of PC David Rathband. And as for Khurram Awan, he got 2 concurrent life sentences for conspiracy to murder and for the attempted murder of PC David Rathband, and his minimum term is 20 years. Both men also got 7 years for robbery, and Ness in addition was given 5 years for a firearms offence. Scott Raisbeck, meanwhile, got 15 months because he moved the van that Moat used when he shot Samantha and murdered Chris Brown, and he also hid some of the items that were in the van. 18 months after being shot by Moat, PC David Rathband died. However, it wasn't due to any of the injuries that he suffered from being shot. The injuries that he sustained left him blind, and he just couldn't cope with being blind. And for that reason, on the 29th of February 2012, in his home in Blythe, the man was found hanged. It was suicide. A murder, a suicide, and a 6-day manhunt that came at such huge expense, all because of one man with a shotgun and with severe anger and jealousy issues. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.